Oh,
Good afternoon, class. How are you guys today?
We're good,
Hi.
Mr. Lardali.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about a very important topic, especially for any of you guys that plan on going to college in the future. And that topic is about some of the information that we use to explain the world around us. Now, this information comes in two major different groups, the first of which we're calling primary sources, the second of which is secondary sources. Now, to establish some context for ourselves within which we can explain these things, illustrate them a little more easily, let me ask you guys a question. Is anybody interested in history?
I love history.
Oh, you do? Great.
Yeah.
So within American history, are there any events that particularly pique your interest?
Let's see. I actually really like the Civil War.
Okay. So one day back, you may want to be a historian, and you may want to study the Civil War. And in doing so, you might go out to a museum and look at some guns, look at some photos that came from the Civil War, or maybe some journals that came from the soldiers. All of these things, because they actually came from the event itself, or in the case of the journal, were written by people that participated in the event, are what we call primary sources. So let's think of a more modern example. It doesn't have to be that these things are 150 years old. The event can happen whenever. So let's say, for instance, Pac or Jonathan, you have a crush on Julia. So last night you went home and you were thinking about this crush on Julia, and you wrote in your journal about your crush on Julia. Now, the event is you having a crush on Julia, and you are an active participant in that, obviously. So this journal that you wrote about this crush, we're going to call a primary source. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay.
Yeah.
You sure?
Mm-hmm.
Any questions? Okay, so those are the primary sources. Now we have secondary sources, right? So we were talking about the guns and the photos in the journal, and those are primary sources. So secondary sources are anything that would be written about those primary sources. So perhaps some academic, somebody that graduated from our middle school, perhaps went to Brown University, they wrote about these primary sources in a book. We'll call this like an academic journal or whatever. Those would be secondary sources because that person that wrote about this didn't come from the event and he wasn't directly linked to the event. He was a person that wrote about primary sources. Does that make sense to you guys? Mm-hmm. Okay, so again, let's think of a modern example. Let's look at the same example. So perhaps some rotten kid, maybe it was Misa, she decided that she was going to go hang out with Pac or Jonathan, steal that journal he was writing about Julia. And then she reads the journal, she sees that Jonathan obviously had a crush on Julia, and she decides to go to the school newspaper and write an article about this crush. So that would be, we would call that a secondary source because she's writing about a primary source. Now there's some problems that come with secondary sources, and most of these problems come in the way that people interpret information. So perhaps you said not only that Jonathan has a crush on Julia, but they're going out all of a sudden. So obviously that's not what he intended by the primary source, but that's what ends up in the secondary source, right? So does that make sense to you guys, the difference between primary and secondary sources? So just really quickly to recap. So a primary source is something that comes from an event, whether that's the Civil War or any other event. These things come in the form of maps, statistics, journals, photos, artifacts, a whole bunch of different things. Whereas secondary sources are things that are written about those primary sources. They're sources of information. They're usually in the form of like academic journals. Beyond that, there's also newspapers and magazines, which are also really common sources of secondary sources. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so who wants to be brave here and try to explain to us what a primary source is?
Misa volunteers.
Lisa?
Go Misa, you know this.
Oh, is that our activity? No, we're not going to work on our activity right now, but we'll do that later. We'll do that later. What's the definition of a primary source while you're out?
Primary source comes directly from the event or the person.
Okay, great. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
Okay. Julie, what's a secondary source?
It's also something that comes from an event or a person.
Okay, so it's about an event, right? It's about an event, but how is it different? So this secondary source, would that have been written by somebody that experienced the event? So would it be written by, if we're talking about the Civil War, would it have been written by a Civil War soldier?
No.
No?
No.
So how's it different then?
So you're writing about a primary source. Is that right?
Yeah. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
Okay, you sure? Okay, so last night I gave you guys some homework. I know
I'm
some
so
of you may
excited.
not have done it, but are you? So I gave you guys two different documents. I didn't tell you exactly what we were going to do with those documents, but I told you to look at them, right? Well, I'm telling you now that one of those documents, and all of you guys have different documents, one of those documents was a primary source. The other one was a secondary source. But obviously I didn't label which one was which. So what I want you guys to do is I'm going to give you guys the opportunity to sort of work together, maybe teach each other what you guys know. So one by one, I'd like for you guys to come up here, present to the class what your two documents are, and then have the class not guess, but make an educated guess based on what we now know about primary and secondary sources to choose which one's the primary source and which one's the secondary source. So Misa, you seem a little eager to get up here. How about you start? Okay.
So I had documents on, one of them was the statistics on the test scores at our school, and then the other
Which
was
are really good this year, by the way, guys.
and the other was an article about how we were doing so much better in our test scores.
Oh, okay. So what do you guys think? So you said you had statistics, right? Okay. And then you had an article that was written in our school paper, right? So which one do you guys think is a primary source?
I would say the statistics are primary source.
Okay, statistics. Jonathan, do you agree?
Yeah, sounds like
Okay. Why do you think the statistics are the primary source?
it. Just because they were taken at the time of the events, so someone had to gather that information at a certain time frame.
That's good. No, that's
Sounds about right.
no, that's very insightful. That's good. That's good. Okay, so the second one. Are we assuming the second document that must be the secondary source?
Yeah.
Okay. Why do you guys think that's the case?
Because it references the statistics.
Okay.
It's an article that's written about
Yeah.
statistics.
Okay. Yeah, you guys are on a roll. That's good.
Statistics themselves.
Okay, so I want to pick your guys' mind a little bit. This is a difficult question, but what are some problems you guys might foresee with those secondary statistics, or those secondary sources, I'm sorry. So with the article, is there any problems you might see? So if you guys were, studying statistics, if you guys were educators and you wanted to look at these statistics and you wanted to see how the school was doing, but instead you guys were like, okay, well, I'm kind of lazy. I don't want to look at all the numbers and, do all the calculations myself, so I'm going to look at the article. And based on this article, obviously it's our school's doing well, right? Do you see any problems in that? If you guys want accurate information, really good information, would you choose to look at the article or would you choose to look at the statistics?
Statistics.
Why do you think that's the case?
I think you don't know how well they're doing unless I think you look at the statistics.
Okay, so that's good. So you don't know how accurate the information getting in the article is, right? Okay, beyond that, there might be some hidden information too, right? So maybe some students are doing really well, other students aren't doing really well, but this article doesn't tell us that. And it might be interesting for us to find out what students aren't doing well so we can put more effort into making sure that everybody's doing well, right? Okay, well thank you very much. That was really good, thank you. Okay, so I know you guys are all really eager to get up here and, teach each other what you guys know, but we're going to cut it short today, okay? And we're going to just work on our chant from yesterday. You guys remember it?
Yeah.
You guys remember it? Okay, so I don't know if it made sense to you guys yesterday because I didn't actually teach you guys about primary and secondary sources, but now that you know something about primary and secondary sources, it might have, it might be pertinent to you guys. It might actually have some meaning, okay? So should I start? You guys want to start with me?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. Ready? Maps,
Maps,
pictures, autobiographies, graphs, artifacts, and Frank's diary. Primary sources are leftovers from our history. Textbooks, journals, biographies, the New York Times, encyclopedias. Secondary sources, the things we write about. Primary sources. Great. So who wants to solo it out now? Julia?
Okay.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Maps, pictures, autobiographies, graphs, artifacts, and Frank's diary. Primary sources are leftovers from our history. Textbooks, journals, biographies, the New York Times encyclopedia. Secondary sources, the things we write about. Primary
Great.
sources.
Give Julia a round of applause. Okay, so before I let you guys go, who learned something? Anything? No, not really? You guys think this is practical? Yeah, you guys are all going to college, right? Yeah, after these test scores, and you guys all have a good shot, too. Okay, so you guys will be using this stuff one day. I don't know how pertinent it is right now, but we're going to be writing an essay tomorrow. You guys are going to use it then. You guys excited for that? No. Okay, well, anyway, thank you guys, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.